And I am so pleased to meet all of you. As an educator, I think it is wonderful that you are here, that you have chosen to engage with the multitude of histories here in Rhinebeck. I think of histories as the collective memories of humanity. Each of these histories is a thread in the tapestry of who we are. Yet, there are certain threads that have gotten lost in the tapestry. These are the histories we have neglected to remember or have chosen to forget. The history of my people and how they were enslaved right here in this country is an example of a narrative that has been smoothed over and buried. I fear that if we continue to bury histories like this, the forgetting and the burying will become habits and will be passed down to future generations. This simply cannot endure. My name is Susan Elizabeth Fraser, and I am here today to share my history with you. In life, I was an educator and a fervent advocate for the rights of my fellow Afro-American women. My parents engendered a powerful belief in me that people like us, including women, have every right to participate in society. This belief became my creed and the purpose of my life's work, which was not at all easy. I had a lot of obstacles in my way, which brings me to an important point. Because of my race and sex, I was doubly excluded. I was denied equal rights and opportunities by white men because of my race and sex, by white women because of my race, and by men of my race because I was a woman. Now, Black women's experiences are not the sum of racism and sexism. Rather, racism and sexism augment each other, and they double the experience of discrimination. I have a prime example for you, actually. The year was 1886, and I had just graduated with a teaching degree from the Normal School in New York City, which would eventually become Hunter College. Well, the year I graduated, a book called Men of Mark was published. It was written by Mr. William Simmons and featured the untold stories of African American men of excellence. Now, this was all well and good, and frankly much needed, but the issue is that there were only men in this rather thick volume. Oh, and the book dedication. That illustrates how demeaned we Afro-American women were by some of the males of our race. Let me read an excerpt to you now. This volume is respectfully dedicated to the women of our race. Now, that sounds fine so far, but there's more, mind you. This volume is respectfully dedicated to the women of our race, and especially to the devoted, self-sacrificing mothers who molded the lives of the subjects of these sketches, laboring and praying for their success. It is sent forth with earnest hope that future mothers will be inspired to give special attention to the training of their children. After reading Mr. Simmons' dedication, I wanted to have words with him. First, I wanted to ask, if you were so grateful for these women, why did you neglect to include them in your book? I then wanted to argue that, while mothers are certainly worth celebrating, young Afro-American girls should be taught that they can be anything. They do not have to be mothers if they want to be something else. Well, I played the whole thing out in my head a few times, but never did meet with Mr. Simmons. Well, since I could not speak with Mr. Simmons personally, I decided to write a piece of my own in response to his book. I ended up delivering my essay titled, "Some Afro-American Women of Mark," to the Brooklyn Literary Union on February 16, 1892. It included a written biographical sketch of the poet Phyllis Wheatley that I am very proud of. Well, this is not the only story I want to tell you today, however. I want to tell you about how I became not only the first woman of color, but the first person of color to teach in mixed-race public schools in New York City. Now, it was massively challenging to achieve this. The process was incredibly discouraging. I vividly remember applying to be a public school teacher. I had been a substitute teacher for a number of years. It was in 1894, and a position at a school with white students opened up. After sending in my application, I was invited to meet with Principal F.W. James at School 58. Now, I was elated by this invitation, but when I arrived at the interview, Mr. James declined my application immediately on the grounds that appointing a woman of my heritage would cause trouble. Oh, I was outraged. There were teachers like me in the schools of Brooklyn, Jersey City, Boston, and in other cities, and I thought it was time that the color line was obliterated in Manhattan. Well, I then took my case to court. My attorney at the time applied to a Supreme Court for a writ of mandamus against the schools. Of course, the judge at the time, who prided himself on being a good Democrat, rejected the request, stating that school officials would never refuse to appoint an eligible candidate based on race. In short, he dismissed my case as nonsense. Yet my case was in all the headlines. This put quite a bit of pressure on the city of New York, as you can imagine, and I finally ended up getting hired as a school teacher after 2 years of fighting. Thank you. Of course, though, as Mr. James anticipated, people were very much opposed to my appointment as teacher. Yet in a short time, people began to warm up to me. In fact, as a result of a contest in 1919 that I won based on my popularity as a teacher, I was sent overseas to see the battlefields of the Great War in France. Of course, despite being one of the most popular teachers in my school, there was opposition to my going overseas. But I was also the target of opposition while on the trip. I remember the first time our tour group dined in Paris, and I, being the only teacher of color, was asked to dine separately from the white teachers. This set a fire in me. I have come this far already, I thought to myself. And then, without making a scene, I proudly took my seat with the white teachers anyway. Other than that quibble, my trip through France and England was very pleasant. Speaking of the battlefields, during the Great War itself, I took on the role as president of the Women's Auxiliary to the old 15th National Guard, which served African American soldiers fighting in the war. I also worked with the 369th Infantry National Guard. Now, this was the successor of the previous organization. This iteration of the group provided assistance to the wives and relatives of soldiers after the war. Now, I recognize that my time with you is coming to an end, so I would like to say something. In 1921, my brother Frederick and I purchased 3 lots of land for the Fraser family plot, where we're standing. And I would like you to take a look behind you, just across the road from here. That area over there is a half-acre of land called Potter's Field, or Section E. It was the gift of a woman named Mary Garretson, who was a daughter of abolitionist missionary Freeborn Garretson. Miss Garrison donated Section E to the United Methodist Church in 1853, strongly stipulating that it be used for the burial of Black Americans. Well, 3 years after purchasing the land for the family plot, I passed away. The date of my death was February 3rd, 1924, and I died of a severe illness I would rather not mention. I actually didn't even have a tombstone when I died, but I am told that in this century, historians who took a great interest in my life and in my work erected one for me, and that's why it looks so new. I am also told in the hereafter that full military honors were held in the 369th Regiment Armory after I died. Commanding officers read eulogies, and my casket was draped with the American flag. St. Philip's Protestant Episcopal Church in Manhattan, where I worshiped and taught Sunday school, also unveiled a tablet in my honor. It warms my heart to know that I was honored with such love and grace. And yet, at the time of my death, this country was still fraught with prejudice against my people, and still is today. Still, there is segregation. Still, there is hate. And hate is a beast of a thing. Now, before I leave you, I would like to say something. My people and I are part of a race that has always been prayerful and long-suffering, yet ever patriotic and loyal to the interests of this country. It is my unwavering belief that this nation will never be truly powerful unless every citizen, regardless of race, color, or creed, enjoys the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that is his or her God-given right. Thank you, friends.